What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Miguelito To Toe, where we talk boxing, the fighters, the business, and everything happening outside the ring. Today, we're back in Fightland. Episode 1 introduced us to Duke Kilroy and showed us that this isn't going to be your traditional boxing series. But now we're on episode 2, and things are starting to get serious. Warning: spoilers for Fightland episode 2 ahead. If you haven't watched the episode yet, go watch it first and then come back because we're getting into it. Episode 2 is where Fightland starts showing us what kind of series it actually wants to be. Episode 1 was largely about setting up the world. We met Duke, we met Kingsley, we learned about the relationships and the conflict surrounding them. But episode 2 starts moving those pieces around, and that's what I enjoyed about this episode. We're not just being introduced to characters anymore. We're starting to see the consequences of their decisions. One of the biggest things I noticed in episode 2 is how much we're starting to understand Duke. This isn't simply a guy trying to get back into boxing. He's carrying a lot of anger with him, and that anger is becoming part of the story. Duke knows what he wants, but the problem is, getting what you want and getting it without destroying yourself are two completely different things. And that's where I think that this character is going to become really interesting. He's a fighter, so his instinct is to fight, but not every problem can be solved with a punch. The boxing business. This is probably the part of Fightland that I'm most interested in talking about on Miguelito To Toe, because episode 2 continues to show us that the boxing ring is only one small part of the game. There's money, there's promotion, there's reputation, there's influence, and then there's power. That's something boxing fans understand. A fighter could be talented as hell, but if the right people aren't behind you, getting the right fights can become a completely different battle. Fightland takes that reality and puts it into a much darker environment. And then there's Kingsley. This dude continues to be one of the most interesting characters in the series because he's not just trying to deal with Duke, he's trying to maintain control, and that's a major difference. Kingsley understands that power isn't necessarily about being the strongest person in the room. Sometimes it's about making sure everybody else believes you are the strongest person in the room. That's what makes this relationship with Duke so interesting. These two men understand each other, and that's dangerous. Duke and Kingsley. The relationship between Duke and Kingsley is really becoming the heart of the show. You've got two people who know each other's strengths, they know each other's weaknesses, and they both have reasons not to trust each other. That's basically a recipe for disaster. And episode 2 makes it clear that their conflict isn't going away anytime soon. If anything, it's getting worse. Now let's talk about the action. Episode 2 continues to give us the violence and the intensity that Fightland promised in the first episode. But what I like is that the action doesn't feel completely disconnected from the story. When somebody gets into a confrontation, there's usually something behind it. There's motivation, there's history, there's something at stake, and that's important because random violence gets old. Violence that actually moves the story forward, that's different. For me, the biggest strength of episode 2 is the tension. You can feel that something is coming. Even when people aren't throwing punches, there's this feeling that somebody could snap out at any moment. And that's actually the atmosphere a show like this needs. I also like that we're getting more layers to Duke. He's not simply a boxer, he's a man trying to figure out who he is after everything he's been through. And boxing is one of the few things that still makes sense to him. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you episode 2 is perfect. There are still moments where the show feels like it's trying to move a lot of storylines forward at the same time. Some of the characters could use a little more development. And if you're watching this strictly as a boxing fan, you might find yourself wanting more actual boxing. That's probably my biggest criticism. Give me more fights. I'm watching a show about a heavyweight champion. I need to see this man work. But at the same time, I understand why the writers are holding some of that back. They're building the world first. Here's something episode 2 made me think about. Is there a difference between being a boxer and being a fighter? A boxer understands technique, distance, timing, defense, strategy. A fighter? A fighter is somebody who has something inside of them that makes them willing to keep going when everything else says stop. Duke has both, but the question is, what happens when the fighter inside of him takes over? Because that's where things can get dangerous. My favorite part of episode 2 isn't necessarily one particular punch or confrontation. It's watching the tension build between the characters. The show is making me ask questions. Who's actually telling the truth? Who can Duke trust? What does Kingsley really want? And how far is Duke willing to go? Those are the questions that keep me watching, and that's what a good second episode should do. So, what's the verdict for episode 2? 8.5 out of 10. I actually enjoyed episode 2 more than episode 1. Episode 1 had the job of introducing us to Fightland. Episode 2 starts showing us what Fightland can actually become. The characters are getting deeper, the conflict is getting bigger, and the stakes are getting higher. Most importantly, I'm invested now. I want to see what happens next. Fightland is becoming less about whether Duke can get back into the boxing world, and more about whether he can survive the world he's walking back into. And that's a very different story, because Duke isn't walking into a clean boxing gym with a trainer telling him to work on his jab. He's walking into a world filled with people who have their own agendas, and everybody seems to want something: money, power, revenge, control. And Duke, he's got something to prove. So that's my review of Fightland episode 2. Now I want to hear from you. Did you enjoy episode 2 more than episode 1? Do you think Duke is making the right decision? And here's the big question: can Duke survive this world without becoming the very thing he's fighting against? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Miguelito To Toe, and hit that notification bell. If you're enjoying these Fightland reviews, we're going to keep breaking down this series episode by episode. This is Miguelito To Toe, and remember, the bell hasn't rung for their last round yet. I'll see you in the next one.